get our business underway here today. Before we go to the daily routine, I just want to read the late debate draw under motion or under Rule 5.5. Therefore, it be resolved, the House of Assembly recognize that this government has kept its promise to maximize federal funds to build the infrastructures that communities need, like the interchange in Highway 101 at Margeson Drive. And that's been put forward by the Honourable Member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville and will be debated at the hour of interruption at 6 o'clock. Before we start daily routine, I'll allow the member from Cumberland South on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring the attention of the members of the House to a well-known gentleman in the Speaker's Gallery. Everyone would remember Mr. Bill Casey, who was a Member of Parliament for Cumberland, Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley for many years. Mr. Casey's here today to actually, I guess, give credit, but also take part in a free clinic, which I hope the members had the opportunity to take part in downstairs. This free clinic was provided for by the Cancer Society, and of course the dermatologists were here today to provide their services free of charge. As the House would know, Mr. Casey had been diagnosed with malignant melanoma, and he found that form of cancer, and they discovered it as a result of him tending a free clinic in Ottawa, such as was provided here today to us. So certainly he's living proof of the value, and we owe a great deal of gratitude to the Cancer Society and to the doctors who came here today to provide this free of service charge to us. So I'd ask Mr. Casey to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We welcome Mr. Casey and all our visitors here in the gallery this afternoon. The daily routine, presenting and reading petitions. The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
What day is this? Well, Mr. Speaker, they're asking what day it is. It's day 17, Mr. Speaker. Day 17, Mr. Speaker, broken promises. And of course, what led to this petition in Cumberland County was this headline. I know that the members, certainly Premier's heard before. It says, Dexter says he'd keep Tory promises. Mr. Speaker, that led to a petition in Cumberland County. The prayer reads, we, the residents of Cumberland County, implore that Premier Darrell Dexter keep his word and build a correctional facility in Cumberland County. Mr. Speaker, this is signed by 263 residents of Cumberland County, bringing the total today to 1,688. And I've signed the petition. There's many more to come, Mr. Speaker. Thank
you. The petition is tabled. Any further petitions? Presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I wonder if I may make some introductions before I begin my statement.
Certainly.
Mr. Speaker, in your gallery, we are joined by, if I get this right, it's G Captain Andrew Denny, Captain Ryan Paul, and Deborah Ganesh, who is the Executive Director of the Mi'kmaq Association of Cultural Studies. I understand that Andrew Denny is also a great athlete, excelling as a goaltender, and somebody here told me that he was a great shortstop with the Cape Breton Pepsis. I'm not. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the House to welcome our guest here today. Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place today to make a statement on a matter that is of great importance to the history and culture of the people of Nova Scotia. On June 24th, 2010, marks the 400th anniversary of the baptism of Mi'kmaq Grand Chief Henri or Henry Membertou. This historic event signaled the peaceful intentions between the Mi'kmaq and the European nations and established a deep bond of faith between the Aboriginal community and the Catholic Church, a relationship that continues to thrive in Mi'kmaq communities 400 years later. Today, the Mi'kmaq of Nova Scotia announced their plans for and around the Membertou 400 celebrations. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we place tremendous value on the Mi'kmaq's contributions to the province's history, culture, and economy. The Membertou 400 celebrations will provide an opportunity to build a greater understanding of Mi'kmaq history as well as the issues facing Aboriginal people today. These events represent another important step in enhancing the understanding and appreciation of the rich culture and heritage of the Mi'kmaq. It is a celebration of the life and legacy of Grand Chief Member 2 and the culture and contributions of the Mi'kmaq people. Mr. Speaker, I believe there is much to be learned from the experiences and the character traits of our forefathers, and in particular, Grand Chief Member 2, who demonstrated the qualities of intelligence, courage, selflessness, and leadership. He remains today a hero to many Mi'kmaq and taught the new European settlers many of the skills they needed to survive in our cold and sometimes inhospitable climate. Chief Member 2 embraced Catholicism, and his people were among the first Aboriginals in North America to adopt Christianity. Over the next 50 years, many Mi'kmaq followed his lead. Mr. Speaker, the Member 2 400 gathering runs from June 24th to the 28th and is the largest of its type ever held in Atlantic Canada. It will include a reenactment of the baptism in Port Royal, celebrations at the Halifax Commons, featuring cultural displays, music and dancing competitions, a concert by Buffy St. Marie, traditional Mi'kmaq food, and an open-air Catholic Mass, and many more. The province of Nova Scotia has been a supporter of this initiative since its inception and has provided both financial and in-kind contributions. I believe that strong partnerships are the foundation of success. Today's announcement demonstrates that there is goodwill and a common interest in helping the Mi'kmaq to achieve their vision. Mr. Speaker, together, let us celebrate this important milestone in our shared history. With Mr. Speaker, thank you. Merci. Walalio.
Thank you, Premier. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First off, I want to thank the Premier for giving me an opportunity to see the remarks in his presentation earlier. I also want to welcome our guests here in the gallery and thank them not only for the events that are going to unfold in June, but for their commitment to the province of Nova Scotia and making sure that we celebrate our collective heritage to show the world what a multicultural country we are. I represent the riding of Annapolis. Port Royal is part of the territory that I have the honour of representing in this House. I'm excited about the events that will take place on June 24th, and I know that the community is ready to celebrate. It is, quite frankly, I believe, the birthplace of the multicultural Canada that we know today. It is a little over 400 years ago when the French arrived to join the first settlers, the first people of our land, the Mi'kmaq people here. And this is giving us an opportunity to help celebrate and perhaps look back over our collective history, which always hasn't been positive. But this is an opportunity for us to celebrate what has been a positive relationship for us as a province. I'm also a practicing Roman Catholic in the Diocese of Yarmouth, and I belong to the parish of St. Alphonsus. While it's been a difficult time for Roman Catholics across the globe, it has been the faith in the Church that you turn to in your belief in a higher being, someone who will hold you in not only your tough days, but you rely on in your good days, to see us through as a congregation. But I think it's what will hold us through as a country and as a globe. I was struck today when I was at the celebration when Mrs. Marshall gave a prayer. I've never been to a celebration, the First Nations community, where we do not start by a prayer, and it was alluded to today, but it's always a prayer of thanks for what they as a community have and what we as a province and as a country have, and turning to that faith of strength. More often than not, we rely on our faith in our worst days, very seldom giving thanks on our best days. All of us could learn, quite frankly, from the Mi'kmaq community that we turn to our faith in our very best days. I'm looking forward to June 24th when you're visiting the constituency of Annapolis and Port Royal, and I'm looking forward to the celebrations that will take place here on the Commons. It is an opportunity for our province to showcase our province, not only for us to learn about the Mi'kmaq culture, but it's an opportunity for us, the province, to showcase ourselves to the world, because quite frankly, I believe this celebration will be captured all over North America. And I want to thank and congratulate the Premier and this government. And I know there was the previous government was starting conversations with the Mi'kmaq community about this celebration. I want to thank them as well. This has been a period of time, Premier, and I will acknowledge this as we talk about this celebration of a healing and a celebration. This is one. Your move that was and your government's move with Africville was another. And it will be a great summer for the province of Nova Scotia to move forward and continue that healing process that we need to do. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I'll take my place.
Thank you. I'll now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, would like to thank the Premier and his government for the statement today and for the beginning of celebrations, Member 2 400. And I would also like to extend my welcome to the guests in the gallery today. It truly is an event that is of great cultural and historic significance in this province. And mention has been made of our government. I'd like to speak just a moment about the opportunity that our cabinet had in 2008 to meet with the Council of Chiefs. We were hosted by the Council of Chiefs at Escasoni. I believe it was the first time that our Executive Council of the province of Nova Scotia had met with the Council of Chiefs. And I think it was a real beginning. And it's one that we value, we appreciate. At that time, the Mi'kmaq Nationhood Proclamation was signed, and it was the beginning of a look at governance, a look at cooperation, and I encourage the Premier and his Cabinet to continue, and I also encourage the Council of Chiefs to make sure that what started in 2008 is continued, because I believe it will continue to foster good relationships in the province. And so I would ask all Nova Scotians to take part in the celebrations and to show their sense of pride in the diversity that exists in our province. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further statements by ministers? Government notices of motion. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Grand Chief Member 2 was one of the greatest leaders of the Mi'kmaq people, a man renowned for his leadership, bravery, and loyalty. And whereas Grand Chief Member 2, born in 1510, was one of the first people to meet the Europeans who traveled to North America, and he established rapport and mutual respect when the French arrived in Port Royal in 1604. And whereas as a sign of alliance and friendship with his French allies, Grand Chief Member 2 became the first Aboriginal leader in North America to be baptized on June 24, 1610, an act that helped bridge the gap between the native and non-native cultures. Therefore, be it resolved, the members of this House honour the great contributions of Grand Chief Member 2 during this year, the 400th anniversary of his Catholic baptism, and encourage Nova Scotians to attend events honouring the Mi'kmaq leader who laid the foundation for peaceful relations with Europe. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for a waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas art and culture make a significant contribution to our quality of life and are vitally important to the economy and the health of every community in Nova Scotia, and whereas a group of dedicated volunteers began a collaborative pan-Canadian movement known as Culture Days to raise awareness, accessibility, participation, and engagement of all Canadians in the arts and cultural life of their communities by encouraging the arts and cultural community to offer free activities that invite public participation and hands-on interactive experiences. And whereas Nova Scotia is home to many talented artists and arts organizations whose high-quality cultural products are in demand around the world, and are recognized for their social and economic impact. Therefore, be it resolved that September the 24th to the 26th shall be cultural days in the province, and I urge all Nova Scotians to celebrate our vibrant and diverse arts and cultural community. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, April 21st, the province celebrates Nova Scotia Maritime Day. And whereas Nova Scotia Maritime Day is an opportunity to celebrate and embrace Nova Scotia's maritime culture and seafaring heritage. And whereas Nova Scotia Maritime Day raises the profile of Nova Scotia's maritime industry and is an opportunity for all Nova Scotians to appreciate the importance of this industry to the province's economy, culture, and heritage. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House celebrate Nova Scotia Maritime Day and recognize the efforts of those individuals who have worked hard to organize and plan this important day in Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Education Week honors teachers and education partners' commitment to their students and subjects, and whereas the theme for Education Week 2010 is equity in education supporting all students. And whereas Sheldon Estates of the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board, Clarence Ruddick of the Strait Regional School Board, and Sylvia Paris of the Department of Education were honored on Monday, April the 19th for their dedication to inclusive, equitable education. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mr. States, Mr. Ruddick, and Ms. Paris for their heartfelt dedication to their profession and Nova Scotia students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to enter a bill, an act to amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Workers' Compensation Act.
The Honourable Member for Kings West begs leave to introduce a bill, an act to amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Workers' Compensation Act.
Bill 37, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 10 of the Acts of 1994-95, the Workers' Compensation Act.
Order this bill be read a second time on a future day. Any further bills to be introduced? Notices of motion. The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canadian Dermatology Association and Halifax dermatologists have organized a skin cancer screening clinic at the Nova Scotia House of Assembly today for members and staff, and whereas Dr. Richard Langley, Dr. Laura Finlinson, and Dr. Carrie Purdy will be carrying out these screenings, and whereas the screening is being held to raise awareness about the need for early detection of skin cancer, therefore be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly extend our appreciation to the Canadian Dermatology Association and the Halifax dermatologists who are striving to bring awareness of skin cancer and its prevention to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day. I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 21st is Administrative Professionals Day, an occasion to celebrate the significant contributions these individuals make to the workplace, and whereas the wide range of skills needed by and demands placed upon administrative professionals make them an irreplaceable component of any office setting, and whereas this day is a fitting tribute to those who do so much and often do not get the credit they deserve. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of the House of Assembly take the opportunity on this Administrative Professionals Day to acknowledge the contribution administrative professionals make to many businesses and organizations in the province. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed?
Agreed.
All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Go Clean, Go Green initiative is taking a new approach to waste management, and whereas the program is looking to teach and encourage youth to help reduce litter and encourage a green way of life, and whereas the program hosts an annual cleanup day, which includes a corporate challenge and a student challenge encouraging participants to become involved in a cleanup day, while at the same time encouraging them to take pride in their community. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize the important value of Go Clean, Go Green initiative and all participants and local businesses involved who continue to make the program a huge success. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver notice passed without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. Any further notices of motion? The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Mr. Speaker, before I read my resolution, I was wondering if I could introduce a colleague of mine in the a friend of mine in the gallery.
Absolutely.
In the gallery today, the HRM councillor, past Lions Club member and citizen of my community, Reg Rankin, is here. I wonder if you could stand, Reg, and receive our recognition. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Terry Wadden is retiring this year as the principal of Sir John A. Macdonald High School in Upper Tantallon, and whereas this accomplished educator has demonstrated exemplary leadership during his teaching career, and whereas Terry Wadden's devotion and hard work are much appreciated by students, staff, and community, therefore be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates and thanks Terry Wadden for his many years of service as a teacher and administrator with the Halifax Regional School Board, with best wishes of good luck in his future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas April 18th through 24th is recognized as Volunteer Week in Nova Scotia, and whereas volunteers are the heart of our communities, and whereas both the municipality of the District of Chester and Halifax Regional Municipality are recognizing the multitude of special volunteers on Wednesday, April 21st, 2010. Therefore, be it resolved that all recipients of volunteer awards in those two municipalities be congratulated. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Entrepreneurs with Disabilities Network promotes and facilitates entrepreneurship among people with disabilities to ensure that persons with disabilities can realize their dreams and reach their full potential, and whereas the 15th annual celebration of the Entrepreneurs with Disabilities Network was held last night, April 20th, here in Halifax, and whereas Dan McNeil of Sydney Mines, founder of OurTownEarth.com received the 2010 Entrepreneur of the Year Award, which recognizes and celebrates entrepreneurs with disabilities who have demonstrated business growth, innovation, passion, and persistence. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly thank the Entrepreneurs with Disabilities Network for its work on behalf of disabled persons over the past 15 years and congratulate Dan McNeil on being named the 2010 Entrepreneur of the Year. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Acadia Robot Programming Competition mission is to foster interest in computer programming, science, math, problem solving and teamwork among students in both junior high schools and at senior high schools, and whereas the 2009-10 edition of the Acadia Robot Programming Competition took place on January the 30th and featured 43 teams from across Nova Scotia. And whereas the event was a spectacular success due to the dedication and hard work by event staff and organizers at the Jodrey School of Computer Science at Acadia University. Therefore, be it resolved that this House congratulates all event staff, volunteers and sponsors for their significant contributions in making the 2009-10 Acadia Robot Programming Competition in Wolfville a successful and memorial learning experience for so many students. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas milk is an essential food for many Nova Scotians, and whereas a high quality of milk and milk products is demanded by consumers, and whereas Owen and Lloyd Blois of Upper 9 Mile River have been awarded the Florence Cox Award for Excellence by Farmers Cooperative Dairy for the second year running, and have also received an award of excellence for 20 consecutive years of producing quality milk from dairy farmers in Nova Scotia. Therefore, be resolved, this House of Assembly congratulates Owen and Lloyd Blois on their awards, and especially the Florence Cox Award, and thank them for ensuring that the milk they send to Nova Scotians is of the highest quality. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the book's Letters from India by Molly Titus takes us back in time through a wonderful collection of letters so important to our history. And whereas letters of Mary Robertson, Sedgwick Puxley, and Jimmy H.L. Puxley take us back to a time of intriguing world events in a part of the world most of us will never visit. And whereas these letters from the 1930s and the 1940s were published in a book last year, which has gained great coverage in Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize Molly Titus of Port Medway, Queens County, for her wonderful book, Letters from India, and the authors of those letters, Mary Robertson Sedgwick Puxley and Jimmy H.L. Puxley, her mother and father. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 4-year-old Kyla Jessie Annette Foster of Crowell, Nova Scotia, donated 10.5 inches of her hair on February the 4th, 2010, to be used to make wigs for sick children who have lost their hair due to medical treatments. And whereas Kyla Jessie Annette Foster wanted to help children who are suffering from life-threatening illness, and whereas Kyla Jessie Annette Foster unselfishly donated her hair in an effort to brighten the day of another child. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate 4-year-old Kyla Jessie Annette Foster of Cole, Nova Scotia, who donated 10.5 inches of her hair on February the 4th, 2010 to be used to make wigs for sick children who have lost their hair due to medical treatments. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do this resolution on behalf of the MLA for Halifax Citadel Sable Island. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 2 Halifax theatre companies won 2010 Robert Merritt Awards, and whereas 2B Theatre earned 12 nominations and 2 awards for outstanding performance by an actor in a supporting role and outstanding lighting design, and whereas Neptune Theatre Company earned 11 nominations and 3 awards for outstanding performance by an actor in a leading role, outstanding costume design, and outstanding sound design. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates 2B Theatre and Neptune Theatre on their many nomination and Robert Merritt Awards. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction before I read my resolution.
Certainly.
Thank you very much. In the East Gallery, 2 of my constituents up near the top there, Don Calhoun and Steve Andrews, would appreciate the House welcome in the usual way. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Bridgewater Bulletin, a weekly newspaper in Bridgewater owned by Lighthouse Publishing, has been delivering the news to the residents of Lunenburg County for 123 years and recently learned that they had received 7 awards in the Better Newspapers competition sponsored by the Canadian Newspapers Association that will be handed out in Toronto on May 13th, 2010. And whereas reporter Paula Levy took top spot in the Outstanding Reporter Initiative category for her feature series entitled A Reason to Belize, and her colleague Robert Hurdle achieved 2nd place honors in the Best Historical Story category for an amazing 3rd year in a row. And whereas the Bulletin team won several other awards, including 1st place in Best Newspaper Promotion for the 3rd time, as well as awards for Outstanding Community Service, Best Special Section, and General Excellence, and being nationally recognized for their community website, southshorenow.ca. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Lighthouse Publishing staff for the national recognition accorded them by winning these awards from the Canadian Community Newspapers Association, commend them on their hard work and dedication, and wish them continued success in their efforts to provide top-quality news and community service to the residents of Lunenburg County. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the children of Nova Scotia are important to this government, and whereas in the budget for the fiscal year 2010-2011, the Minister of Finance announced funding for the construction of West Highland School, and whereas the NDP government is keeping its commitments and making the right decisions for Nova Scotia families. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates the town of Amherst and surrounding areas on the forthcoming new West Highland School and the high quality of education that their children will receive. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Doug Eaton of Kentville has volunteered for almost 40 years in many sports organizations, including hockey, soccer, and baseball, coaching a women's hockey team to a national championship and a girls' soccer team to become provincial champions, and has coached more hockey teams than can be easily listed. And whereas Mr. Eaton has served on the Kentville Recreation Advisory Committee, been a member of Big Brothers and on the VON Annapolis Valley. And whereas Mr. Eaton has was inducted, into the Kings County Academy Hall of Fame in 1999 and is a Rotary International Paul Harris Fellow, therefore be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognize Mr. Doug Eaton for his dedication and mentorship to many young people, for long-standing service to his community as a volunteer, and congratulate Mr. Eaton on being named Kentville Volunteer of the Year for 2010. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Alex Legg is a former resident of Mahone Bay and student at Parkview Centre who has long been recognized as a top basketball player in Nova Scotia, and whereas the AUS All-Star and Rookie of the Year and Dalhousie student is currently on the Dean's List and has been awarded Dalhousie President's Award for Excellence in Athletics, Academics, Leadership and Community Service, as well as being selected by the AUS Women's Basketball Student Athlete and Community Service Award winner and nominee for the Canadian Inter-University Sport Sylvia Sweeney Award, and whereas Ms. Alex Legg has earned the highest honor in the Atlantic University spot as a recipient of the 24th Annual James Beyer Memorial Scholarship Award on March 3rd. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Alex Legg on receiving this distinguished honor and commend her for her continued commitment in sports excellence, academics, and community involvement. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Guysborough, Sheet Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the ExxonMobil and the Sable Workforce have been selected to receive the 2010 OTAN's Petroleum Pioneer Award, and whereas this award honors individuals or organizations that have made outstanding contributions to the development of the Nova Scotia petroleum industry, and whereas this award will be presented on Thursday, April 22nd at the Petroleum Pioneer Dinner, which will be held at the Kennard Centre, therefore be it resolved that the members of the House of Assembly congratulate the ExxonMobil and Sable Workforce on their OTAN's Petroleum Pioneer Award. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the New Glasgow Kinsmen have been donating to Summer Street Industries for over 40 years, and whereas the New Glasgow Kinsmen have helped to keep the doors open at Summer Street, a facility which helps to broaden the horizons of adults with intellectual disabilities by offering adults the opportunity to learn in the computer labs, paint, play music, and learn office skills. And whereas the Glasgow Kinsmen have graciously donated over $1 million to Summer Street Industries through events like Kinsmen TV Bingo, therefore be it resolved that all members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly recognize the important contribution of the Glasgow Kinsmen to Summer Street Industries. Without this type of donation, they would not be able to offer their wide variety of programs. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the SS Atlantic, the White Star Line's first disaster at sea, written by Greg Koshkoff and Bob Chalk, was chosen as the winner of the Dartmouth Book Award for nonfiction and the Democracy 250 Award for historical writing at the recent Atlantic Book Festival. Whereas Mr. Koshkoff spent 20 years researching the wreck of the SS Atlantic off Lower Prospect by performing hundreds of dives, and Whereas Mr. Chalk, a friend and scuba diving partner of Mr. Koshkinoff, who died unexpectedly in 2008, and completed the book about this disaster that took place in April 1873 near Terrence Bay. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature offer its congratulations and best wishes to Anne, Mr. Koshkinoff's widow, and Bob Chalk on the selection of the SS Atlantic, the White Star Line's first disaster at sea, as a double winner of the Atlantic Book Awards. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Oxfam Canada is a non-profit organization which works to build lasting solutions to global poverty and injustice, and which has been active in Halifax for 37 years. And whereas Pat Kipping, the Senior Fund Development Officer with Oxfam in Halifax, is leaving after over 6 years to take on another challenge, and also Dick Evans is stepping down from the Oxfam Canada Board of Directors after 11 years, during 5 of which he served as board chair. And whereas a celebration of their contributions to Oxfam will be held this coming Saturday, April 24th, by their many friends and fellow Oxfam supporters, therefore be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly thank Pat Kipping and Dick Evans for their years of dedicated service to the great work of Oxfam Canada, and wish them both well in all their future endeavours. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on Sunday, May 16, 2010, the White Rock Community Association will celebrate the 25th anniversary of the White Rock Community Centre. And whereas the White Rock Community Association will celebrate the spirit of volunteerism and pay tribute to past and present members who helped to build, grow, and carry on the work of the association and the community centre. And whereas the White Rock Community Centre has built a sense of community and has contributed greatly to the lives of White Rock and area residents for 25 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Legislature congratulates the members of the White Rock Community Association on the 25th anniversary of the White Rock Community Centre and send best wishes in their future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas volunteers are crucial to improving the quality of life in communities, and whereas service organizations such as the Lions Club have long been instrumental in focusing the energies and talents of volunteers, and whereas on January 30th, 2010, John McMullen was recognized by the Milford and District Lions Club for 35 years of service. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates John McMullen of the Milford and District Lions Club for his 35 years of volunteerism and thanks him for his selfless service. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver, notice, and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Clark's Harbour resident Joyce Swim has once again gone above and beyond the call of duty by participating in the 29th annual Terry Fox Run on September the 13th, 2009. And whereas Joyce Swim, who is a cancer survivor and a Terry Fox team member, has participated in the Terry Fox Run for 27 years, raising an estimated $13,000 for cancer research. And whereas Joyce Swim, who at the young age of 73 also participated in other community events that help fund cancer research and offer financial assistance to local cancer patients, including the Relay for Life and the Rosalind Nicholson Cure Fund. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly congratulate Clarks Harbour resident Joyce Swim, who has once again gone above and beyond the call of duty by participating in the 29th annual Terry Fox Run on September the 13th, 2009. Mr. Speaker, request waiver and notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the South Queens Junior High School Robotics Club competed in the 4th annual First LEGO League Smart Moves Challenge at Acadia University in February of this year, taking first place for the South Shore and 7th place in the province. And whereas the club was required to build and program a LEGO Mindstorms robot to explore the best way to move people, goods, services, and data around the world. And whereas the team was required to present for 5 minutes and program the robots to explore the growing questions around how to make transportation more efficient. Therefore, be it resolved that the House of Assembly recognizes the South Queens Junior High School Robotics Club for their ingenious accomplishments at the 4th annual First LEGO League Smart Moves Challenge and for their 5-minute presentation on the viability of public transportation in Queens County. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of Mr. Pereira, Leonard Pereira, Halifax Citadel, I'd like to move this resolution. Halifax Citadel. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas David Sharp of the Halifax Trojan Aquatic Club is a first-year student at Dalhousie University, and whereas David was honoured with 1 gold medal and 3 silver medals at the 2010 Canadian Inter-University Sports Swim Championships and was named Atlantic University Sports Rookie of the Meet and Swimmer of the Meet, and whereas David also received 9th place in the Pan-Pacific Swimming Trials in Montreal and has been recognized by Swim Nova Scotia as a Male Swimmer of the Year for 2010, therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates David Sharp on his extraordinary swimming accomplishments. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of motion and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the People First movement in Nova Scotia was started in 1989 by those who have been labelled intellectually challenged, and whereas People First gives its members their own voice in the community, a better future, and the opportunity to take control of their own lives, and whereas the Kings County branch of People First provides guardianship, encourages employment, supports meaningful living arrangements, and understands the importance of building community, therefore be it resolved that the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly congratulate the Kings County branch of People First for promoting quality for all people who have been labelled intellectually challenged, for teaching the community about its issues, and for supporting members as they speak for themselves and make decisions about their own lives. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Mahone Bay Printmakers Group is comprised of 10 local artists who work out of studio space located in the Mahone Bay Centre, and whereas the Mahone Bay Printmaker Group has been actively making relief prints, collagraphs, etchings, and monotype prints at the studio since 2003, and whereas the works of the Mahone Bay Printmakers Groups entitled Recent Impressions will be featured exhibition at the Lunenburg Art Gallery on the month of April. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize the artistic merit of this printmakers collective and congratulate the Mahone Bay Printmakers Group on their month-long exhibit at the Lunenburg Art Gallery. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favour signify by saying aye. Aye. Those against say nay. The motion is carried. We'll soon be going into oral question period. Just a friendly reminder, no electronic equipment to be on during the question period. And secondly, I'd ask you to direct all questions here, questions and answers through the chair. The time now is 2:58, and we'll go to 4:28. And I'll recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. First, the Dalhousie Medical School, and now the St. Francis Xavier Nursing School. Makes people wonder who might be next. Today it was reported that the bureaucracy was responsible for the confusion surrounding the $2.5 million cut to the Dal Medical School, along with the $5.3 million cut to the nursing school budget at St. FX. Mr. Speaker, leadership starts at the top. The excuses for mistakes and confusion have to stop. So my question to the Premier, can the Premier explain how this could happen?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank Member Opposite very much for the question. No notice has been given to St. FX with respect to the withdrawal of any funds in this regard, and in fact the government is working with the university to ensure that the same number of seats are going to be there in the nursing program.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Premier and the ministers involved have stated that a committee has been struck to address the issue. The only confusion here, Mr. Speaker, seems to be with government. It's pretty straightforward. You meet with the institutions involved. You explain that you are transferring funding to another department. You transfer the funding to the other department. You confirm that the institutions, the amount of the transfer. End of story. It is really not that difficult, Mr. Speaker. Today, a spokesperson for St. FX stated that they were notified that government intended to withdraw their funding for the final year of that 3-year agreement. So my question to the Premier, will the Premier admit that the government meant to make the cuts and they are now backing away, or is government just that unorganized that they can't figure this out?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Funding to St. FX for this program has increased by about $8 million over the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker. The government is involved, the department is involved in negotiations currently. The object of those negotiations, of course, is to ensure that the program is properly funded and that the same number of seats will be available.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's media story indicated that funding has not been transferred and that funding will be placed in next school year. With all due respect to the communication officer that has been thrown under the Dexter bus, I'm not sure whether that means September 2010 or for the academic year commencing in 2011. So my question to the Premier, will the Premier please confirm whether the funding will be restored by September of 2010, or will cuts have to be made to the nursing program at St. FX?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated already in the previous two answers to this question, there are negotiations going on now between the Department of Education, they get funding from both education and from health, but the The negotiations are ongoing. The expectation is that they will be able to maintain the number of seats that are currently in that program. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the government is trying to make sure that the money that we are giving out or advancing through to these programs are spent as efficiently and effectively as possible.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Premier. In opposition, the NDP were very vocal about the need for Lucentis, a drug used in the treatment of macular degeneration, to be funded by the Department of Health. But since taking office, the NDP government has done nothing to make this happen. In fact, during questioning last week, the minister distanced herself from prior commitments and statements. So my question to the Premier is this: why does this government now no longer see the funding of this drug as a priority?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to respond to the honourable member's question. Mr. Speaker, the government understands the value of many of the new drugs that are coming onto the market, that we understand their importance to the people who would benefit from them. We also know that there is a funding envelope that is available to the province for the purposes of supporting those drugs. So what the government has done is we have looked at establishing a drug policy unit to be able to manage these costs and to look at drugs as they come onto the market and come onto the formulary. So that process is currently underway. The Minister of Health is of course shepherding that effort, and we are we are looking at some positive results from that will allow us to address the very kinds of issues that the honourable member raises.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in your first supplementary.
Thank you. Lucentis has been proven to restore vision in 70% of those with macular degeneration. If these patients do not receive the treatment, the related costs to the healthcare system far exceed the cost of the drug. So my question to the Premier is, when will you have this drug added to the approved list to address both the short-term and the long-term benefits?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated in my previous answer, we are, of course, very cognizant of the benefits of many of these new drugs that are coming onto the market and are being proposed for use in the province. And we want to ensure that there's an appropriate drug management policy unit in place so that we can balance the expense that are associated with many of these new drugs with the effective nature and to see how we are able to manage those costs within the system. I think everyone understands that the healthcare budget is a very large one in this province, and we need to ensure that we approach this issue respectfully but cautiously.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take that to be no, it will not be approved. So my question is this: doctors are now prescribing Lucentis for their patients, but many Nova Scotians must still cope with the loss of vision because they are finding the costs to be beyond their means. How are Nova Scotians, to the Premier, how are Nova Scotians who require this drug to treat their condition, how are they expected to use it when they do not have the finances to pay for it and the government refuses to add it to the approved list?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the position that the member opposite advances is an important one. It's one that we are very cognizant of and considerate of. But the same argument is true for many drugs, for many of the new drugs that are coming onto the market. So that is why we have put in place the initiative that I mentioned with the Department of Health to ensure that there is a management unit that looks at the drugs. lives. And Mr. Speaker, you know, much of the conversation that took place in this House over the last couple of weeks was about controlling drug costs in our province, and we wanted just to assure the member opposite that we're fully cognizant of both sides of this issue.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
My question is for the Premier. Yesterday, the Premier confirmed that the taxpayers paid close to $10,000 to move a political staffer from Manitoba to Halifax. The Premier said the staff person worked for him years ago and was recruited because of the expertise she acquired in the Dewar government. I accept the Premier's claim that this person is highly skilled. She is, however, political staff and not a member of the civil service. So my question to the Premier, who in your office approved the moving expenses of this political staff person?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the people who are in the Premier's office work in the service of the people of the province. They are, of course, my staff. The rules that apply to them are the same rules that apply in the handbook for civil service staff, Mr. Speaker. They would have been hired, and of course, moving expenses is a normal part of the recruitment process.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. Actually, this was a 2-for-1 deal. The government actually got 2 political employees from Manitoba with this move. Shauna Martin and Wade Dirksen were moved together. Mr. Dirksen is a senior advisor to the Minister of Health, another political position. Mr. Speaker, the moving and relocation policy of the government actually only applies to civil servants. So my question to the Premier, will the Premier table the government documents that require taxpayers to pay for the moving expenses of political staffers?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I don't know a company anywhere that goes out and recruits staff and doesn't, as part of that, pay moving expenses. And I mean, this is part of the recruitment and the recruitment policy program of most companies. And of course, it has been the practice of the government, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
On occasion, the practice of companies to move their employees, and if the New Democratic Party wants to pay for the moving expenses of its political staffers, it can do so, but the taxpayers of Nova Scotia should not. Shauna Martin's contract says she was seconded from the New Democratic Party caucus office on June 22nd, yet she was moved in August from Manitoba. Obviously, this highly skilled person was brought here to work in the NDP election campaign in the guise of working in the caucus office. So my question to the Premier, when did Ms. Martin arrive in Nova Scotia, and what work did she perform during the election campaign?
The Honourable Premier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. She arrived, I think, as he indicated, in August of last year. I have to say, over the course of the election, Mr. Speaker, she arrived here, as I've indicated. She was a resident of Manitoba. She came here because of the expertise that she has, particularly in research. Mr. Speaker, we were very pleased that she agreed to stay. And of course, as part of the normal recruitment process, the moving expenses were paid.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is also for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, yesterday during estimates, the Premier offered a travel log of sorts of his time going from Halifax to Vermont and on to Western Canada. Unfortunately, the Premier lost his luggage on that trip, something many of us have unfortunately experienced from time to time. Now, the Premier suggested to the Leader of the Opposition yesterday during estimates that while he claimed the cost of new clothes, he reversed the claim as soon as he noticed it. However, the Premier's expense record shows that while the August 5th claim was filed on September 22nd, the revision to remove that claim did not come until days before the beginning of this session of the Legislature on March 22nd, 6 months later. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier tell me why it took him a full 6 months to notice and reverse this claim?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I can. I would tell the member that I asked for a review of those expenses, and one was carried out. This particular one was picked up. I had assumed that those costs, of course, would go through to Air Canada, since they were the ones who lost the luggage and should be responsible for paying, and that the province of Nova Scotia should not be. So that is why that was submitted.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, between this claim and the mileage claim that the Premier has already reimbursed, it almost seems as though the Premier is using the provincial treasury as his own private bank for small 6-month loans. Mr. Speaker, as it happens, and perhaps the Premier will recall from last summer, that I lost my luggage on that trip too. Except I lost it on the Continental flight to Vermont just a few days before the Premier. So I have a feeling, I feel for his situation, but you know, I walked up to the hotel around behind the, I walked up to the Macy's behind the hotel and bought some clothes, and it never occurred to me that I should file an expense for the clothing. Never occurred to me. Yet the first thing the Premier did was file a claim. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier explain exactly why he thought it was appropriate to file a claim for clothes in the first place?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, I was on the business of the province. I was representing the province of Nova Scotia at the Council of the Federation meeting with the other premiers of this country. And, Mr. Speaker, obviously, I needed to be able to have clothes to be able to do that. And I indicated to the Leader of the Opposition I indicated to the Leader of the Opposition that when I realized that this was the case, what I did was withdrew that claim and I submitted it to Air Canada, which I think is a reasonable course of action that anyone would expect.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm pretty sure I was on the business of the province too at the Council of State Governments, yet I didn't file the claim and he did. So there is a difference and it's a judgment call. Mr. Speaker, it's rapidly appearing that the Premier either does not keep good track of his own expense claims or, and it looks like there's a pattern that he waits until he's either caught or until he's about to caught before he fixes the mistakes. So, Mr. Speaker, can the Premier tell this House what the public should think of his judgment that you claimed an expense few would even likely think about claiming and then reversed it 6 months later when you thought it might become public?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, what I can tell the member opposite is that I attempt, I think as most members of the House of Assembly do, to make sure that your records are as complete and full as possible, and that my practice is to make sure that all of the claims that I submit are done in good faith. When I recognize that there is an error, though, Mr. Speaker, I am a big enough person to be able to withdraw that and to set it right appropriately. I think that that's what the people of Nova Scotia expect, and it's what I expect of myself, and I'm sure it's what the member expects of himself as well.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Education. Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board received a 2% increase in funding this year. Do you know what that amounts to in actual dollars?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be pleased to get that information and share it with the member during budget estimates. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, through you again to the minister, I can answer that for it comes to $2.7 million. Also this year, Madam Minister, your friends at CUPE negotiated a 1.9% raise for their members. Do you know what that raise would amount to in the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, despite my reputation for working long hours and trying to be all things to all people, no, I'm afraid I don't have that detail in my head. Thank you.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary is through you is to the Minister of Education once again. Funny enough, the raise received by CUPE members in the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board comes to $2.7 million. Your increased funding to the board only covers the cost of your negotiations with your CUPE friends. Knowing this, will you now consider giving the school board an actual cost of living increase this year in order that students won't be the losers?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government was pleased to provide $20 million extra to school boards across the province. And, you know, we've had many meetings with both school boards and their senior officials. And we understand there will be challenging times ahead. And we certainly will be working side by side in order to make sure that the students in our schools have the best possible education that Nova Scotians can afford. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read a little quote from the member from Shelburne on September the 23rd, 2008, and I quote, "The U.S. House moved last night to prohibit oil and gas drilling around Georges Bank. The United States realizes that the valuable fishing grounds around Georges Bank need to be protected today and in the future and took a positive step in its protection of the area." He also stated, "In Nova Scotia, the Minister of Energy has to stop flirting around with the idea of drilling on Georges Bank and commit to protecting it." So my question to the Minister is, what is the NDP government's policy on drilling for oil on Georges Bank?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to the member opposite. I want to congratulate the member for quoting me on the fisheries issue. What our government is doing, there is a decision that's going to be decided on by June the 1st by the Minister of Energy, and what our government is doing is collecting all the information, and I can, for the member opposite, is very aware of the technology, and I think every member in this House can look at the technology that has evolved in the last 10 or 15 years, and presently it's either on the wheelhouse of a boat or the on person. But Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairperson, Mr. Speaker, this information is going to be gathered by our government, and we're going to make an informed decision at the appropriate time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the minister speak about the new technology. He also spoke about it on Monday during estimates. And the minister said the new technology out there makes it almost impossible for there to be a leak or spill or blowout when drilling. So my question to the minister, are you aware of the public inquiry in Australia right now about the 71-day-long, 2 million litre, 9,000 square mile oil spill caused by the modern equipment used for drilling?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and the member opposite, he made quotes. I want to go back and check the answer on that because I question that. But I also can tell the member opposite that I'm very familiar with the sensitivity around Georges Bank. I'm very familiar with the seismic testing around our world in that particular situation that I described. But I also go back that this particular government does our homework. We'll gather that information and we'll make an informed decision at the appropriate time. Thank you.
The honourable member for Digby Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, let me read to the House another quote from the member of Shelburne on April the 21st, 2009, exactly 1 year ago today. The reaction to potential drilling on Georges Bank is clear. Fishermen, residents, and the impacted coastal communities do not want it. It's time for the Premier and the Minister of Energy to start listening to the people of the province and protect Georges Bank moratorium. Maybe the Energy Minister should spend a little more time with the people in Southwest Nova, the people whose lives would be impacted the most. So my question to the Minister of Fisheries, now that you are a minister, you have to look them in the eyes. What are you going to tell the people of Southwest Nova about drilling on Georges Bank?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I can tell the member opposite is I can look a number of people in the eye in the coastal communities across Nova Scotia, and I can look them in the eye and say that on June the 9th, 2009, they asked for leadership, and this is what they're going to get on this file. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is for the Minister of Education. The Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board received a 2% increase in funding this year. Now, we know that this increase only covers the cost of salary hikes in the school district. My question is, how do you expect the school board to balance their budget when you haven't even given them a cost of living increase for this year?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is investing $1.1 billion into public education. That's what is being sent out to the boards. And we met with the boards early on to find out what their cost pressures were going to be this year. And as far as possible, we are helping them meet all their obligations in order to ensure the best possible education for students in our schools. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, through you again to the Minister of Education. This board needs 3.6% to maintain the status quo. I think you have found a way to help them, though, because you told them that if they want to balance their budget, the Cape Breton Victoria School Board has been given a $500,000 credit for allocation for textbooks. And you've told them it doesn't have to be used for textbooks. You can take half of that and put it on the bottom line of your overall budget. Could you please tell me, Madam Minister, is this fair to the students that many of them won't be getting new textbooks this year because the Dexter NDP government refused the increase to the board's budget even though costs are increasing?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's interesting that a member representing the former government would ask me a question about textbooks, because actually when the budget was passed last fall, there was a $4 million reduction in textbooks that was suggested by the previous government. And certainly our government has tried to put much of that money back in and to pass on that flexibility to the school boards. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Minister. Well, you know, it's interesting how the Minister can always remember numbers about what somebody else has done, but can never remember what's the right thing to do. Now, she's given them an allocation of $500,000, Mr. Speaker, and they can put it on the bottom line. She's not worried about textbooks. She already told them that. The Cape Breton Victoria School Board, like many boards, are struggling. This board looked at the possibility of closing some smaller schools, rural schools at that, and yet to their credit, the board decided these closures of small rural schools was not a road that they wanted to go down. But in turn, they are looking at the entire system. Has anyone in your department, Madam Minister, spoken to Cape Breton Victoria School Board, and how are you going to stop closures of small schools in rural Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A number of issues were raised in that final question. Certainly, boards have the ability and they have the responsibility to try to juggle the amount of money that they're given among their facilities, among their professional and support staff, and among their programming. And to their credit, the boards across this province have done a tremendous job in managing their resources and their revenue. And certainly, we have always worked alongside the boards in terms of school reviews. We improve the process to ensure more accountability and more involvement of the public. And certainly I know the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board recently chose not to review 8 schools, and that certainly is their decision. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Clare.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, as we are all aware by now, the federal government has announced that through creating Team Southwest and the province creating Team West, both levels of government hope to strengthen the economy in Western Nova Scotia after this NDP government decided to cut the ferry service out of Yarmouth this summer. My question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, can the Minister inform the House who are the members on Team West and who are the members on Team Southwest?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I do know with respect to the membership of the team does overlap. There are representatives, the stakeholders are people from community, politicians from the area. For a more specific number, what I can do, Mr. Speaker, is I can provide names after consultation with my department, and I will certainly table those names in this House. There are a number, and again, I reiterate, the names are overlapping as well. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Clare on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I would welcome if the Minister would table that information. Mr. Speaker, the Minister seems to only add to the confusion over these 2 damage control teams. Yesterday in the House, we all listened to the Minister talk about Team West and Team Southwest and who does this and how this team is like this other team and so on and so on. While the Minister and the NDP fight with the federal Conservatives over who gets credit for which team does what, the 2010 tour season approaches, and there is still no plan for this year. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister is, why is it more important for the NDP to try to score political points than to ensure a strategy for Southwest Nova Scotia is in place for this summer?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I can say this, and I can say this in all sincerity, and it's unfortunate that somebody would talk in political terms such as that, because certainly this government and this minister is not in.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister has the floor.
Is not involved for political glory. This is about doing the right thing. This is about doing the right thing for the people in that region and trying to promote tourism and economic development in the area. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Clare on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it does not matter to the people of Southwest what team does what. What they need, Mr. Speaker, are solutions to the problems this minister has created. The NDP has no plan for 2010. The minister is too distracted by politics to do what he's supposed to be doing. Mr. Speaker, as confusing as the minister was yesterday, his silence on one particular question was quite clear. The NDP has no plan for 2010. So again, Mr. Speaker, through you, I will pose the same question again to the minister and give him a second chance to answer this question. What is your plan for 2010?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Mr. Speaker, the only confusion that exists here is from that member who's asking the question. I would say that the plan that will come out of this is a combined effort by the stakeholders, Mr. Speaker. We are working with them, Mr. Speaker. We are just one member of the team. This is a team. This is a team that's dedicated.
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
This is a team that's dedicated to the region. This is a team, Mr. Speaker, that they are driving it. They are driving it. We are merely a participant. We are there to assist and offer some expert advice when requested.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much. Well, wouldn't I like to ask a question and comment on that last one, but I'm going to leave that to the member for Clare. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try to finish my question from yesterday to the Minister of Health. As we know, the Department of Health apparently inadvertently cut the $2.5 million in funding to the Dalhousie Med School. We have learned through media and through the Minister that the NDP government now says it intends to form a committee to report back on the current funding arrangements. So my question to the Minister of Health is, why did you preempt the committee's findings and make a cut before the results were determined? Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to maintaining the seats at the medical school at Dalhousie. Mr. Speaker, those seats are financially supported both by the Department of Health and the Department of Education. Mr. Speaker, the funding formula is not very transparent, and we have a working group that is working to make the funding formula for those seats transparent, and they have already met, and they will be meeting again. And Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we will have a strengthened formula that is more transparent and accountable for the people of the province.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In an attempt to justify this harmful action, the Minister of Health was quoted in yesterday's Chronicle Herald as saying the government is going to sit down and discuss the complexities of the funding arrangement and get a more transparent arrangement in place that works for everyone. So it sounds like she is reading very well from her prepared text. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister, how would a sudden cut of 8% from the Dalhousie Medical School work for students, faculty, and the Nova Scotia population in great need of doctors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the member's estimation of an 8% cut is greatly exaggerated, Mr. Speaker. However, Mr. Speaker, we do have a working committee. The working committee is, as I indicated, working through the details of a system that is very complicated, that is thoroughly lacking in transparency, Mr. Speaker, and at the end of the day, we will rectify those problems with the current funding arrangements, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Argyll on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the 8% cut to the Dalhousie Med School is a quote from the Dean of Medicine in that same article, yesterday's Chronicle Herald. So, Mr. Speaker, it's not something that we made up. It's something that the faculty has said, that they're looking at an 8% cut to their program. The need for doctors in this province comes as news to no one. We believe the latest move by this government will simply compound what is already a very serious issue. My final question to the Premier, will you commit it today that not one job or seat will be lost at the Dalhousie Medical School as a result of this inadvertent cut.
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the member opposite has heard the answer repeatedly. He understands that negotiations are underway and that the intention of the government and the Minister of Health is to ensure that no seats will be lost at the Dalhousie Medical School.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the Nova Scotia Gaming Corporation. On April 1st, I asked the Minister about the province's development of a new gaming strategy. He indicated that between now and October, he will be, and I quote, working with all interested parties to develop a gaming strategy that will govern this government over the next 5 years. Mr. Speaker, given that the NDP has been contradicting their own position which they held in opposition, it is more than reasonable to insist that the Minister begin the discussion clearly and publicly in this House. My question, will the Minister commit to tabling in this House his detailed plans for consultations with stakeholders and indeed all Nova Scotians on this issue?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Gaming Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is committed to renewing the gaming strategy for the next 5 years. We're almost to the stage of being able to announce that, but we're not quite there yet. So I just ask the member for just a little more patience.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development publicly admitted that she will continue to suppress a study on the impacts of gambling. Mr. Speaker, in less than a year, the NDP has turned themselves completely around. At first, they only used consultants as political cover to hide behind, but now they are more than comfortable with suppressing information and withholding reports. My question, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister responsible for the Nova Scotia Gaming Corporation urge the Minister of Labour and Workforce Development to end the secrecy, release this report to the public so that they can decide whether it is too confusing?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Gaming Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer that question to the Minister for Part 2 of the Gaming Control Act.
The Honourable Minister responsible for Part 2 of the Gaming Act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The socioeconomic study has been something that's been in progress for over the past 6 years. And early on, the expert advisory committee indicated some concerns about methodology. And so when the draft report was presented to our government in June, shortly after we were elected, we thoroughly reviewed the draft study and recognized the same inconsistencies as had been reported by the expert advisory panel. And so we don't feel that it gives the reliable information that a government and that stakeholder groups and others would need to make responsible decisions. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the problem is clear. The government set the parameters, contracted out for the report, and is responsible to the taxpayer. But not liking the results they got back, the government refuses to let anyone read it. The excuse given, that is confusing, methodology problematic, is a pretty weak one. Mr. Speaker, the solution is simple. The NDP should release the report, give a detailed explanation of what they feel are the flaws in the report. My question to Minister Part 2, would the Minister explain why the NDP does not think that Nova Scotians are smart enough to understand this report?
The Honourable Minister responsible for Part 2 of the Gaming Act.
I can only repeat that this study was started under previous government, that there had been continuous attempts to there had been continuous attempts to improve the methodology so that the information in the report would be reliable. And this did not happen, and it did not make sense to continue, and so the contract was terminated. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
I was very glad to hear the Minister of Fisheries say, and I quote, "This government does our homework," and my question through you is to the Minister of Energy. Mr. Speaker, December of 1999, the Georges Bank moratorium on the oil and gas exploration and drilling in this extremely productive fishing grounds was extended until December 31st, 2012. Has the government looked into setting up a new panel to render a decision on whether or not this moratorium will be extended?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. It's always important when you come to making a decision and the deadline is looming that you're getting the correct information. And it's with some consequence I know that we've looked at this issue, and I've talked to my colleagues, particularly the Minister of Fisheries. I've talked to other members from that particular part of Southwest Nova. This is an issue of real concern, and when you have to make these types of decisions, it's important that we get as much information as possible. We're collecting that information as we speak, or as I speak, and I can assure you that when the time comes to make that decision, it will be made in the proper fashion, and it will be the correct decision.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on your first supplementary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The original Georges Bank panel held their first public meetings in October of 1996 and finished their report in June of 1999. That was 32 months to render a decision and to do much thought and nonpartisan consideration. We're now about 32 months away from the moratorium ending. So does the minister intend to have a full and transparent and clearly established process with regards to this review other than an internal government one?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again to the member opposite for the question. The concern, of course, is that when we have a valuable resource, and my good friend from Digby, Annapolis, brought forward this concern earlier, and you know, all involved have to make sure that they are being listened to and that their particular point of view is being considered as we go forward to make these decisions. The key factor, of course, is that people believe very firmly in the fact it's not necessarily one of these types of decisions that can be made in an ad hoc fashion. It has to be one where we collect the information, we make sure we have the correct information. And I know that the member from Argyll is putting up the 3-2 beside you as he's saying 32 months. If it takes 32 months, if it takes 36 months, it's going to be timely and it's going to be the correct decision.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on your final supplementary.
So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, actually, 36 months would be too late, and in fact, the moratorium would be up at that point. So we need to make sure, and I agree, and we're trying to be constructive, and I recognize the concerns raised by the member from Digby Annapolis. I also recognize the interests of others that see positive coexistence of the oil and gas sector along with the fishing industry. We've seen some indications of people looking at it, especially when you look at the unemployment numbers, that we know that this government have not improved in Southwest Nova, but have further damaged down there. Mr. Speaker, what I'm asking the minister is the government prepared to establish a non-partisan, properly established panel to consider this and report back to government and do it in a very coordinated manner?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you know, to the member opposite, I mean, we are aware of the fact of the implications socially, economically, ecologically. This is an important issue, and it's a very sensitive, time-sensitive, but it's also a very important, sensitive issue for that region of this province. It's an important issue for the entire province. We are continuing to collect information. When the time comes for that decision to be made, it will be made in the proper fashion, and it will be the correct decision.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Last fall, the NDP government increased the accommodation costs for people in long-term care without any public explanation or justification for that increase. As a result of last year's increase, seniors who are charged the maximum accommodation rate are paying over $34,500 per year to be in a nursing home. For information purposes, Mr. Speaker, that's $3,000 more than the year before, a full 10% increase. Given that it's been 6 months since I last posed the question, I'd like to ask the minister, is the minister now able to explain in detail the justification for this increase in the costs?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I believe the explanation is the same today as it was when the member asked the question back in the fall. The cost of operating in the long-term care sector has increased. Insurance, heating, food, all of these kinds of regular expenses go up to long-term care operators, and the rate increases for the room and board part of long-term care accommodations reflect those increased costs, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Thank you. And last year when the minister answered that question, she also referred to some of the costs that are actually in the provincial budget that are health-related costs and that are capital construction costs. Today I see she has not done that, but I still believe that the people need to have an itemization why it would be $3,000 more per year for a person who's paying the maximum accommodation charge. If it goes beyond the costs that are justified, then isn't that more of a tax than actually just an increased fee? So I think we have a right to know what costs have gone up and just by how much, because that's far above the cost of living increase. Mr. Speaker, my question to the minister is why has the NDP government refused to be open and accountable when it comes to justifying to seniors and their families the $3,000 cost increase for accommodation in nursing homes?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're very pleased that in the Department of Health we're able to pick up the health care component costs of living in long-term care. And Mr. Speaker, this is a policy that I take some pride in, having been a member of a political caucus that fought very hard to make sure that that was the policy. And Mr. Speaker, we do know that there are costs associated with being in long-term care that are not health-related, that have to do with the accommodation portion of being in long-term care. And Mr. Speaker, those costs have, just like living in your own private home, have continued to grow as the cost of living has grown in the last year. And Mr. Speaker, we have a review process in the Department of Health that establishes what the per diem will be for that portion of the cost, and it has people have received notices of slight increases around the province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that it's usually November that the costs are increased, I'm not sure what the slight increases are that the minister is referring to, because last year's increases in the per diem was almost 10%. And I think that's an outrageous number given the cost of living and the recessionary times we're living in. Just 2 months ago now, the minister would know that she had announced the security deposits in nursing homes are going to be gone. But my point around that is that that amount coming back to the residents will be completely eroded by the large increase in cost per year for the residents in those homes. And we have a continued secrecy and lack of details around why this is allowed to happen. My question to the minister is, can the minister assure nursing home residents that they won't be paying for the NDP election promise on security deposits through yet another increase in accommodation rates coming through in November?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to say to the honourable member, there is no secrecy with respect to these costs. It's unfortunate that none of the members in the opposition raised any of these questions with respect to these fees if they were so concerned about secrecy and the 25+ hours that I spent on my feet in this House. Answering detailed financial questions with respect to my department's budget, Mr. Speaker. And
order, please. Order. The Honourable Minister of Health has the floor.
And Mr. Speaker, if they had thought to raise these questions when the financial folks were here, I would have been more than happy to provide all of the details at that time, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you will be for the Minister of Health. The reason I'm asking it today, Mr. Speaker, and I didn't ask it during estimates, is the Minister will know Hansard will be readily available tonight or tomorrow morning for people up my way that are really looking forward to hear the answer to the question. Mr. Speaker, through you to the Minister of Health. Recently, members of this House attended the Nova Scotia chapter of the Canadian Diabetes Association information dinner, which I know the Minister attended, and I heard her comments that night. And I know she, like the rest of us in this House, are very supportive of this association and the great work they do as they try to assist Nova Scotians dealing with the very life-altering disease of diabetes. I wonder if the Minister might tell the House if she knows how many Nova Scotia children under the age of 16 have been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, diabetes is quite prevalent in the province of Nova Scotia, and it's growing in prevalence. There are two types of diabetes, Mr. Speaker, type 1 and type 2. Quite often it is children who are diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, Mr. Speaker, which they will experience throughout all of their lives. And the Diabetic Association, as the honourable member indicates, is a very effective organization working with families and children throughout the province, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland South on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, again, through you to the Minister of Health. I would like to tell the Minister of Health about one child in my constituency. His name is he's 9-year-old Grant Wood. Was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes on January 2nd of this year. His father has a medical plan which unfortunately does not cover the opportunity for them to provide a insulin pump for young Grant. His mum has applied for coverage, which she knows that in the end result will be no pre-existing condition to be covered. The family is faced with the purchase of an insulin pump at this time at a cost of $6,800. They're actually hoping now that family and friends are going to come together so they can provide this instrument for Grant to make his life more enriching. I wonder if the Minister could inform the House and the family when she thinks that this government may be able to help the McFarland Wood family by covering the cost of insulin pumps for children under the age of 16.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Insulin pumps indeed are relatively recent devices that have been developed for people with diabetes, and certainly I am told that for children with diabetes, the use of an insulin pump really allows them to lead a much more normalized life in many respects, Mr. Speaker, and it frees them from having to do, a lot of the regular testing and other forms of injections. This is a medical intervention that we are aware of and we've done some assessment of in the Department of Health, like many of the new medical devices and new drugs indeed. And we examine quite carefully what the costs would be, and we attempt to plan for the eventuality of being able to cover these as we're financially able to do so, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland South on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My second supplementary through you again to the Minister of Health. I have no idea how many other families are in the same position as this Parswell family are throughout Nova Scotia and who are attempting to try to make life better for their children with the use of an insulin pump. I just know that I received a letter from Tanya McFarland Wood, and she said exactly those words, Minister, in her letter about a normal life for her young child. I guess my question now would be the Minister, would the Minister at least commit to go back to her department and to Cabinet to see there may be some way they could find some additional assistance to help young Grant and all those other children in Nova Scotia under 16 who need insulin pumps to help them with their diabetes?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're on the eve of the release of quite a significant report on the costs of drugs in Canada. It's going to show where Nova Scotia fits into the mix. We all know that getting drug and pharmaceutical treatments to people, and I would put insulin pumps somewhat in that same category, is a significant challenge for a province that has some financial challenges. But nevertheless, we will look at this issue with great care, because I understand the importance that this particular device could have for children in particular with type 1 diabetes.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, last month a constituent of mine wrote the Minister of Health with regards to concerns she had with her mother's accommodation rate in a nursing home. The resident switched nursing homes, and in September 2009 reported an annual increase of income of $2,430.04, which in her case works out to be a daily increase of $6.66. As a result of her mother's reassessment through the Department of Health, her accommodation rate was increased by $24.73 per day. Mr. Speaker, it doesn't take a mathematician to figure out that her accommodation rate increase significantly outpaced her increase in income by $18.07 per day. So my question to the Minister of Health is, can she explain why the increase in the accommodation rate outpaced the increase in the residents' income by almost $20 per day?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the answer to that question is that rate increases in long-term care are not tied to income in that way, that the rate increases for long-term care are set quite independently of the income of the individuals, although there is a kind of a sliding scale, and there are seniors at the low end of the scale who may in fact pay no fees directly to long-term care at all, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the family will find it quite amusing to hear the Minister of Health saying it's not directly tied to income, because in their case they actually asked for a reassessment, seeing how her income had only increased by $6.66 per day, and yet her daily rate was going up over $20 a day. The Department of Health has come back and asked the family on 3 separate occasions to provide the same income information to the department. So to hear the minister today say it's not tied to income, why are they continually asking on 3 separate occasions for the exact same information? Mr. Speaker, there is mass confusion out there for the residents of long-term care and their families in regards to how this increase in the rates is applying to them. So I ask the minister, if it is not tied to income, why is your department continually requesting families to provide the same information regarding income over and over again?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much.